Hello, well today I am tackling the grafting of the tomato plants. Now I've got a selection of rootstocks here and then I've got some of the scions. Now I've already grafted some of these and these I've managed to cut above the seed leaves, so there's a very good chance that these will now grow new shoots from the leaf axils here, and then I'll get some replacement plants, which might be handy if the grafting goes particularly bad. There's no reason it should, but having never done this before, there's always a danger that I get it a little bit wrong and I have quite a high failure rate. So it's quite handy having these maybe as a backup. Now, things didn't go entirely to plan when trying to develop the scion and the rootstock to the same sort of stage. Advice really varies on this, and of course the ideal thing would have been to stagger sowings or to have done some experiments to judge the right time to sow the rootstock versus the scion. Advice varies, but it's quite often suggested to sow the rootstock 4 or 5 days before the scion. I sowed that 3 days before, and having watched these develop, I think I should have sown the scions first, certainly not later than the rootstocks, and maybe 3 or 4 days earlier than the rootstocks, and I think I would have been in a better position to do the grafting if I'd done that. Now, the seedlings are somewhat leggy. When I potted them on, I didn't set them deep, and I didn't do that because I wasn't sure where on the stems I would be doing the grafting, and I can always, when I pot these on later, I can always set them a bit deeper if I want to. So I didn't see any real reason to plant them deep when I potted these on from the cell trays. And one thing that's very important is that the graft union is well clear of the soil. So I mean, if I take one of these rootstocks, if I'm going to graft down here below the seed leaves, then there's nothing to worry about. I don't need to worry about planting it deep. But if I have to graft higher up, somewhere above the seed leaves, then I can always drop that a couple of inches when I pot them on. So it's not really a problem, but without grow lights, this is always going to be a little tricky to get stocky seedlings when sowing early in the year. So they could be better. I've been waiting for the rootstocks to get to a sensible diameter, and they've been pretty slow putting on their true leaves. And we've got 4 sets of true leaves on both the rootstocks and the scions now, but it's taken quite a long time for these varieties to catch up, and that has left the rootstocks pretty long and leggy, whereas normally I would have sunk those deep and they would have made some quite nice plants. But never mind, I have learnt that with these sorts of varieties, because these are all open pollinated varieties, and I suspect most of the general sort of guidance on how to graft tomatoes assumes that you're grafting a modern hybrid tomato onto a hybrid rootstock. So germination was much faster with the rootstocks. Some of those were up within 3 days, and the rest emerged, many of them on the 4th day, and then I think after 5 days the majority of these were up. There were 1 or 2 specimens that lagged behind. This is a late comer. I won't be able to graft that. That is just too small. But I think 80 out of the 90 came up pretty quick, and they've grown away very well. The open pollinated varieties, these are all, with one exception, these are all old sort of heirloom tomatoes, and germination was slower. I don't think we saw the first one for at least a week, so they were much slower to get going. I mean, that's the sort of speed I'm used to. I wouldn't normally expect to see a tomato pop up until a week has gone by, but they were then slower to get going, and they're a lot less uniform, which is exactly what you'd expect with open pollinated tomatoes. Now, the only saving grace is that, of course, the stems are tapered, so there's quite a lot of option to move up and down these stems to find a position where the stem diameters match, because that's the critical point. Wherever you're going to do the graft, the stem diameters have to match pretty closely. But I've grafted a few already, so I was really worried about it, and I thought I'd made a bit of a mess of it, to be honest, but it seems to be working out okay. So far I've cut, I think, most if not all of the scions above the seed leaves, which is perfect. Now, on the rootstocks, it's very common to graft just below the seed leaves, but you can graft above. You just have to be mindful of side shoots coming up from the rootstock itself, which of course you want to take out, as indeed you want to take all the side shoots out anyway, but they do have the potential to come up from the rootstock if you graft above the seed leaves. So, tools of the trade. Well, I've just got an ordinary knife here, and that I'm using to prepare the grafting clips. Well, I actually have grafting clips on order, but they have disappeared somewhere. They're supposed to be coming from a UK site. I suspect they're being imported, and they're probably stuck in the Suez Canal on that container boat. Who knows? I have no idea where they are. All I know is that they're not here. So I had to make an emergency purchase of an alternative, and this is it. This is ordinary silicone tubing. So these tubes vary a bit, but the wall thickness is somewhere between 0.75 and 1 millimeter, and I've got a variety of sizes. The one I'm using most at the moment is 2 millimeters, and that's the size I want to graft at ideally. I've got some at 2.5, and I have grafted one at 3 millimeters. That's a bit bigger than I really want to use. I think those plants had developed perhaps a little bit further than is ideal. So all I'm doing with this tubing is just cutting it into short lengths, half an inch maybe, 12 millimeters, something like that, and standing them upright, and with the knife carefully putting a slit down on one side so they can open up. And actually there's really no need for, I don't think, for anything else. These work perfectly well as grafting clips, and from what I've seen, there are plenty of people who are using essentially pieces of silicone tubing for grafting. So this seems to be working very well. So I'm just using that craft knife for cutting the tubes. What I'm using when I'm cutting the tomatoes are standard razor blades. Now I just bend these in half and break that, and then I've got two that I can use. And obviously that's very sharp, fine blade, and perfect for slicing up the tomato. So the process is to take one of the varieties and just judge the stem diameter, and then look for one of the rootstocks that might offer a reasonable match. So if I consider the diameter of the stem above the seed leaves, ideally, if I have to, I'll graft these lower down, but ideally I'd like to take it above the seed leaves, and so I'm looking for a rootstock with a matching diameter somewhere handy. Right, I think that one will do nicely. So I'm just going to nip off this growth here, take the top off, throw that away. That's quite important, to throw that away so that you don't accidentally confuse the top that I'm going to cut from here with the top of the rootstock. The last thing I want to do is put the rootstock back on. And then I'm going to take this one out just above the seed leaves. And I will take that label, put it in the pot that the rootstock was in. And now I'm just laying these down to make my life a little bit easier. I suppose if you had some skills, you would just make the cuts by eye and they would be fine, but because I'm new to this and I don't have those skills, I am just lining up the two stems side by side, and then I'm going to make the cut in one go. So I'm doing the simplest form of grafting. There are other ways of doing it. There's a sort of a cleft graft where you cut vertically down through the rootstock, and then you cut a wedge on the scion and insert it into the rootstock. But what I'm doing here is just a simple splice. So I'm looking to make an angled cut across the rootstock and the scion, and they want to match fairly well. So if I line these up together, I've got a better chance of getting that cut right. And then I can throw away that bit because I don't want it. I'll just nip off these old seed leaves because they're no use to me. Now I also want to remove most of this top growth. It's just going to cause too much moisture loss. So very carefully I'm just going to take off those two leaves, and I think I will take off most of that third leaf. So that's all I'm left with, just a small amount of top growth, and I've got cut surfaces that line up pretty well now. So I'm going to take one of these pieces of silicone tube, find the slit, and then slip that over the rootstock. Orient this so that it's pointing in the same direction, and then just slide that down the tube. And that's where slightly better eyesight and a little bit of precision is useful, because the better these match up, the more likely I am to have a successful graft, and that one is actually matching up very well indeed, so I'm very happy with that. And that's basically it now. Once the plants are grafted, they have to go into, well, what they call a healing chamber. So effectively that's an enclosed environment with pretty high humidity, quite warm. So again, guidelines vary, but it's usually anything from sort of 21 to 26 degrees, something like that. So I think I'm probably going to have that around about 24 degrees, but high humidity and low light. So at the moment I've got a heated propagator indoors, which I will have on at 24 degrees. I mean, it's already there. I think at the moment it's on at 20 degrees. Once I've got all these plants in, I will crank that up a few degrees, and I will mist the sides of the propagator to raise the humidity, close all the vents, and I've got it covered with multiple layers of shade netting, and then I can peel off a layer or two at a time to gently increase the light levels as the plants heal. So that healing chamber, it's warm, it's humid, and it's dark, and it will want to stay pretty dark for at least a day or two before the light is gradually introduced. Now these should, well, they will start to heal hopefully very quickly, but after a few days you can start to introduce the light, very cautiously, and if the plants start to suffer, then you can shade them back over again. But I think they will have to be in that chamber for at least a week, and maybe a week and a half, before they can be just sort of put in the greenhouse in their normal environment. So I will be watching those with a great deal of care and a great deal of concern, because having never done this before, I've no idea what my likely success rate is, but I would be very disappointed not to get at least a reasonable proportion of those plants through, despite this being my first attempt. I'm going to be very upset indeed if the entire batch is a write-off, but we will find out in due course. Right, so I've chosen this rootstock because the diameter just below the seed leaves here is a reasonable match for the diameter of the scion just above the seed leaves. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove this growth from the rootstock. Then I'm going to take the scion off just above the seed leaves. So now I'm going to look for a point where the diameters of the stems match pretty well, and I'm going to make a single cut across both of those. Now I'm going to trim the top of the scion. I'm going to remove the first two true leaves and at least half of that third leaf, and then I'm just going to slide this down the tube until it matches the cut in the rootstock. So I'll just finish this video with a few stills that we took during the process. Now the scion in this image looks a little bit ragged. Some of the leaves are damaged around the edges, and that's because I accidentally left a vent open on one of the propagators, and it turned out to be quite a chilly evening, so that was a bit of a mistake. But as it happens, I'm cutting off all of that foliage anyway, so it doesn't really make any difference to the grafted plant. That is it for this video. There will be a couple more in this series on tomato grafting. The next one will be potting on the grafted seedlings, and then there will be one where I go through a few of the lessons learned and things that I'm going to change for next year, and talk about how successful or not it has been. I imagine that I will follow these plants throughout the season. I'll be interested to see whether later in the year there are any signs of graft incompatibility. I hope not, but hopefully all those where the grafts have successfully taken will turn out to be productive plants. But that is all for this video, so thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.